Welcome to session 3 of the CSPro training course. In this session we will start to build the data entry screens for our application. Data entry screens should be designed in such a way as to make data entry easier and to help minimize errors. As far as possible, the screen should resemble the questionnaire. This makes it much easier for the data entry staff. The forms file describes the layout of each of the screens in your data entry application. As with the dictionary file introduced in the previous session, this is a text file, so you can view the contents in a standard text editor. However, you should only change the contents from within CSPro itself, otherwise you can easily make the file unusable. The forms file includes a link to the dictionary file. In the extract shown here, the dictionary file being used is called S2 baseline.dcf. From the previous session, you will remember that the dictionary file has the extension .dcf. The form file itself has the extension .fmf. In a later session, we will talk about the different files that CSPro produces. The forms file always starts with information about the version of CSPro being used, which dictionary file is linked, etc. We then have separate sections for each form in our data entry system. We can have multiple forms, and we would recommend keeping each form reasonably short. An ideal situation is to match each form with a single page of the questionnaire. So as you turn the physical sheet, you also move on to the next form. Within each form definition in the file, all the items used on that form are listed. Any boxes on the form are described. The description includes the size and position on the box on the screen and the type of border used. Boxes are used to split up the form and give visual clues to the user. If there is a box around a set of questions on the questionnaire, then you can put a box around the corresponding items on the screen. Text labels should match the text on the questionnaire. The forms file would describe these labels, including their position on the screen, the font used, etc. As we said, we can have many forms in a single data entry application, and during data entry you will move smoothly from one form to the next. One form per page or per section is a good rule of thumb. That way the forms are kept reasonably short. If the screen resembles the questionnaire, then data entry is much easier and you are likely to get fewer errors. We can't stress this point enough. We would recommend you try and minimize the need for the user to scroll the screen during data entry, and would recommend trying to avoid any scrolling from right to left. In data entry, scrolling up and down tends to be more intuitive, but scrolling right to left is not. So try to make sure that your form fits on the screen widthwise. CSPro includes a feature to automatically produce forms. The command generate forms is found on the edit menu as shown here. This feature would remove any existing forms you might have in the current application, and it will produce a separate form for each record. The automatic forms can be a useful starting point, but we would recommend adjusting these forms so that they match the questionnaire layout. Therefore, you'll need to learn how to move items around the screen. Items can easily be moved around using either the mouse or the arrow keys. If you hold down the Control key, you can select and move multiple items at the same time. When you have several items selected, options on the Align menu enable you to easily line up the items, either to the left, the right, the top or the bottom. So in this example here, we can align these 3 items to the left, choosing the appropriate options from the menus, i.e. their left-hand edges will be lined up. A questionnaire generally includes many text instructions and labels, including headers for sections, etc., and these can easily be added to your forms. Right-clicking on the form will display a pop-up menu from which you can choose Add Text. You would enter the text for the label into the dialog box, and can also set the properties for the text, such as the colour and the font. This will appear on the screen at the location where you did the right click, but you can then move it to the correct position. In earlier versions of CSPro, each text label could only be on a single line of the screen, so if you had a block of text covering several lines, you would need to have separate labels for each line. With version 5.03 released in August 2013, you can now have text labels that span multiple lines. From time to time, you will want to copy or move controls, either labels and items, from one form to another. This is relatively easy. To copy controls, first select all the controls to be copied, then press Ctrl+C. You then move to the form you want to copy the controls to and use Ctrl+V to paste them. The controls will be placed in an identical position on the destination form to what they were on the other form. So, if they're in the top right-hand corner of the first form, they will be in the top right-hand corner of the next form. If there are already controls in the position where they will be placed, they'll be put on top of the existing controls. We recommend you move any controls out of the way first. If you want to move rather than copy controls, then use Ctrl+X rather than Ctrl+C. As an alternative to using automatic forms, you can drag items across to the form from the dictionary. Items will need to be dragged one at a time from the dictionary list. You'd have the dictionary structure displayed on the left-hand side of the screen with the form on the right. In this example, we've already dragged across 3 items, and these appear with a grey icon in the dictionary list. Items we haven't yet put on the form will still have a blue icon. Drag options dictate how items will appear on the screen when you drag them from the dictionary list. The text options refer to the text label that comes across with a particular item. Normally, this will display the item label and the text will be on the left of the control on the screen. You can change these options to use the item names or to make the text appear on the right. Generally, the defaults are more suitable here. A roster is effectively the many side of a one-to-many relationship. It's referred to as a roster as many household questionnaires would include a household roster, i.e. a list of all household members. In our example questionnaire, the fertiliser data is the only section that would appear on a roster. Generally, the roster appears as a separate table on the screen with columns as items and the rows as cases. This is the horizontal layout option. If we were to choose the vertical option, the rows and columns would be transposed. Alternatively, there is the Don't Roster option. If we use this option for our example, we would need a separate form for the fertiliser data, and during data entry we would go round this form several times. Generally, using a roster is clearer. If we choose to use extended controls, this would allow us to use option buttons for items where we have value sets defined. Where we have 8-digit items, CSPro would give us the option to use a calendar to pick the date. Extended controls would also allow us to have text fields that span more than one line on the screen. The other options include Require Enter key on entry, which if selected will mean you would need to press Enter after each item. By default, if you completely fill an item, you would automatically move to the next one, but some people are happier pressing Enter after each item. Also, when you use automatic forms, you can choose whether or not to use any sub-items on the form. If we have sub-items for the parts of the date, for instance, we can either include the single 8-digit item on the screen or the sub-items, but we cannot include both. These are particularly useful for the identification items. Where questionnaires are created, we would recommend including the key fields on each page of the questionnaire in case the pages become separated. We would also recommend including the key fields on each form. Obviously, the forms are not going to become separated, but displaying the key values on each form is a useful reminder of which questionnaire you are currently working on. The value for the mirror fields is only entered once, so you'd enter the identification on the first screen, but you can display the values on all screens. The values can only be edited on the first screen, where they are entered. So now it's your turn again. Start creating the data entry screens for our example questionnaire. Start with the automatically generated forms and adjust these to match the questionnaire as much as possible, adding and editing text labels as appropriate. Use mirror fields to display the identification items on each form. Use a roster for the fertilizer data. As usual, there is a practical handout with instructions to lead you through this process, and there are a couple of videos available that show you the process. We'll leave you with a word of caution. Creating data entry forms can be very time-consuming, and you can easily spend many hours changing fonts and colours or adjusting the position of items. Remember, the purpose is to make data entry easier and more accurate, and not to produce a work of art.